Good afternoon to you. Mark Sott of HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Outlook and discussion for the 19th of August, 2015. Taking a look at the track for Tropical Storm Danny over the next 5 days. National Hurricane Center has it moving on a west-northwest track towards the Caribbean Sea. And obviously this means, if it's spot on, that we could have a hurricane in the region by early next week. I'll talk about more of the impacts, both good and bad, in just a moment. We'll come back to this map. First of all, a wide shot of most of the Atlantic Basin. Gulf of Mexico clear, so nothing to worry about over here. Caribbean as well. I'll discuss this swirl up near Bermuda in a moment. First of all, here's Danny sitting out here in the deep tropics, kind of part of the intertropical convergence zone. Looks more like a wave, but it is there. It's still got a low-level circulation. I'll show you that in just a moment on a wonderful close-up satellite animation. But you can also see in here this little milky color. This is the dry air, the Saharan air layer that kind of rolled off Africa with the tropical wave embedded underneath, almost like a little eddy, as you move your hand through the water and you get these little swirls that come off of it, these little eddies. It kind of reminds me of that, for what it's worth. So here's that close-up shot. This is amazing. Check it out. That is the low-level center right there. You can't miss it. That's the center. You don't want to call it an eye, but that is the center of the storm. And check it out, that deep thunderstorm activity that goes off right there, right over the top of the center. Very small, geographically speaking, but it's trying. Now, that's actually the worst thing that it can do right now. I mean, I guess not, because it has to have convection to survive at all. But what I mean by that, look at this next graphic. Okay? We have a lot of dry air in the mid-levels of the atmosphere still surrounding the tropical storm, especially to its north. Let's use yellow. To its north and its west over here. And if the circulation is sitting in here like this, kind of drawing an S shape around it, and it's trying to pull the air in, it's got some pretty moist air to the south, but that dry air to the north getting entrained. Every time you see these thunderstorms go up, you have to think that the air is converging. All of this air is trying to wrap in at the low levels towards this common center and rise. The air is going up, and then in the upper levels of the atmosphere, it's actually being thrown out in a clockwise fashion with that anticyclone aloft. Well, when it does that, when it develops that deep convection right there, it's like it's taking a big deep breath inward. And you can imagine that if you were in a room full of noxious smoke, something toxic that you shouldn't breathe in, and you took a deep breath and held it, it probably wouldn't be very good for you. And that's kind of what's happening here with this system in this dry air environment. Each time these thunderstorms develop and go vertical, which is what they're supposed to do, convection, it kind of self-destructs itself a little bit. So it's a weird seesaw, a balance that it has to play of trying to do what it's doing, the process of this tropical cyclone going, and not going so much that it ingests dry air that then deflates those thunderstorms. So we're going to see these pulses go up and down, I think, over time, and we'll just have to see. Does the dry air overwhelm the system? And there's still a considerable amount of it over here, as I pointed out, to the west and northwest of the system, and it looks like it's going to be headed right into that. But everything's moving together, so maybe all of this moves with it. Maybe, too, the Saharan air layer moderates just a little bit, like when you get a cold air mass coming out of Canada, and a few days goes by and it gets a little bit warmer. What we call it moderates. I don't know if the Saharan air layer does it the same way, but you would think that as it drifts over the Atlantic, it moistens up ever so slightly every day. Otherwise, you'd have these giant dry outbreaks making it all the way over to the United States. And we do have them, but they're very diminished by the time they get to, say, Florida and even as far west as Texas. So it's going to be an interesting struggle between sort of the dry air and the convective process that's going on. And if Danny wins out over those forces against it, I don't know how it's going to win out over this. We are talking just unbelievable wind shear here on the order of 30 to 40 knots going across the path of the system if it comes into this area. I'll draw the potential track. Here's Danny. Where is it? Somewhere out in here. And so if it comes in like this, yeah, it's going to run headstrong into these upper level winds, and that looks just like a pair of scissors. It's going to shear it off. So it's got a lot of hurdles, folks, I'm telling you, and that's why I think we're seeing this spread now in the intensity guidance. If you remember in a couple of previous blog posts that I've done here, the intensity guidance was basically several of the models up, 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 and up, and only a couple of them were flat. Now you have a very large spread between pretty much all of the models for intensity, which tells me that there is great uncertainty. It's not hard to figure that out. When you have a clustering of the models, that's higher confidence in the model ensemble suite, if you want to call it that, sort of like a consensus, if you will. And then when you have a spread, then you have more uncertainty. It's pretty easy to understand that. And here's another way to look at it. For the track, most of the models are fairly grouped here. You don't see, one of them coming up and going, if my telestrator will work. You don't have anything like this, and another one over here, so that you have a spread of, several thousand miles between a couple of the models. These are fairly tightly clustered on a west-northwest trajectory towards the Caribbean Sea, perhaps, if it survives. Now let me go back to the track map and talk about some of the potential impacts here. Obviously, a hurricane, I think, speaks for itself. If Danny becomes a hurricane, that's a whole other issue to deal with. But what I'm hoping for in the beneficiary side of things is rain for this region through here. They need it. They know they need it. Been very dry down there due to a lack of tropical waves coming through with any convective activity. This dry air pattern that's been over the region has not helped their drought situation, especially Puerto Rico. So maybe this can come through as a tropical storm at best. Hey, maybe even an open, weakening tropical wave and bring a little bit of moisture in here. You don't want too much. You don't want 10, 15 inches of rain. That helps, but it also has a lot of negative side effects that comes with it. So you got to be careful what you wish for. You want the tropical rain, but you don't want 100-mile-an-hour winds, and you don't want feet of rain. Remember, there are some mountainous terrain areas through parts of these Caribbean islands. So we'll have to watch this. If Danny does not become a hurricane, perhaps it can bring some much-needed precip somewhere in this region early next week. We'll have to watch for that. Elsewhere in the Atlantic Basin, we have an area of disturbed weather. I guess this will eventually be called 97L. The way that they do that is they have these numbers 90 through 99 and the letter L for Atlantic, right? If it was in the East Pacific, it would be 97E or whatever number they are on there. And these numbers 90 through 99 are just a way to designate, okay, this system is 97L, and if another one comes off Africa, that would be 98. And it's just a way to keep up with what's what, especially when things get busy, and it's a precursor to becoming a named tropical depression, or then a named tropical storm in many cases when they go on to strengthen. So the next one, 40% chance of development over the next 5 days. This is what it looks like. Right now, an upper level to mid-level low pressure area just to the north of Bermuda, which is right here. And it looks like it's going to try to work its way down to the surface and take advantage of this warm water that's sitting out here over the western Atlantic. And what we'll probably see is sort of a hybrid between a tropical storm, meaning we'll have these sort of banded thunderstorms, and you're starting to see a little bit of that take shape now, but it's going to be spread out and kind of large over a fairly big geographic area and not necessarily tight and concentrated like Danny, especially yesterday what it looked like on satellite imagery. And this is a great example. This is sort of your beginnings of a hybrid subtropical storm, and this is your typical mid-latitude cyclone that has a front associated with it, a low-pressure area up here over parts of Wisconsin and Minnesota, and totally different than something born over the water. So an interesting juxtaposition, to use a fancy word there, between a semi-tropical system trying to go tropical, whatever, and a classic mid-latitude system over the upper Midwest of the United States. So a lot to watch, nothing to really worry about just yet. Whatever happens with Danny, and I'm going to tell you, I have my doubts. I know I said that the other day. I didn't think it would develop at all, and it defied all of that, and, it became a tropical storm. But that dry air, there's been a lot of research done on it, and it seems to just follow logic that dry, stable air is not the friend of tropical cyclones. And then farther to the west, where we have that wind shear, unless that abates, Danny is really going to have a hard time. We'll see. Maybe it's the one that kind of defies everything and finds all the right niches of favorability and takes advantage of the warm sea surface temperatures and thrives. We'll have to just wait and see. Never an easy prospect. It's pretty rare anyway. Sometimes you have it handed to you on a silver platter, the track and the intensity, but those are usually when you have very strong hurricanes, and then you have all the headaches that go along with that. Katrina, Andrew, Charlie come to mind. Luckily, we're not dealing with anything like that just yet. Hopefully not, right? All right, well, that's it for today from me. Thanks, as always, for tuning in. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. I'll be back with more info for you tomorrow.